If you have followed up to here, you know the snowstorm trapped us in that motel room without power and without an exit. My boss, Victoria Sterling, the woman I swore was untouchable, was going into hypothermia, and the only way to save her was to use my own body as a heat source. Now, we are there, in the narrow bed, holding each other in the dark to survive. But as the ice melted, I realized we were crossing a line much more dangerous than the cold, the line between fear and desire. The silence in the room changed texture. It was no longer the terrifying void of hypothermia, but a dense and vibrant stillness, charged with an expectation that made the air feel thick. I could feel Victoria's heart beating against my back, a rhythm that started slow and weak, but now accelerated, echoing the frantic beat of my own chest. My body heat had done the job, crossing the barriers of fabric and skin, and she was no longer an inert block of ice. She was alive, awake, and by the sudden tension that stiffened her shoulders under my arm, she was painfully aware of who was holding her. She moved in my arms, a slow and deliberate movement that made the old mattress squeak in protest. Instead of pulling away or asking for space, she turned her body within the embrace, fighting against the tangle of blankets until she was facing me. The space in the double bed was so meager that our noses almost touched, and I could feel her warm, irregular breath brushing my face, mixing with the cold air of the room. In the bluish gloom projected by the snow on the window, Victoria's eyes shone. They didn't have that laser-focused, calculating look I saw in Monday meetings. They were dilated, dark, vulnerable in a way that completely disarmed me. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the assistant who brought reports, but as the woman who had just saved her from the darkness. Her hand, which previously held my waist, moved up slowly, tracing a path of fire up my arm, until it reached my neck. "Maya," she whispered my name, and the sound was a hoarse, broken moan that didn't seem to belong to Victoria Sterling. Her fingers, still cold at the tips but burning with urgency, flattened on my cheek, holding my face with trembling reverence. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered HR compliance rules, the social abyss between us, the fact that tomorrow she could pretend this never happened. But when she tilted her head, closing the millimeter of distance remaining between us, my logical brain shut down. My body, betraying years of resentment and fear, leaned forward, attracted to her like a moth to a flame. The kiss didn't start gentle. There was no shy hesitation of a first date. It was a collision. Victoria took my mouth with a desperate hunger, an overwhelming need that seemed to have been dammed up for years behind that facade of ice. Her lips were soft, surprisingly warm, and tasted of cold coffee and something metallic that must have been the fear she felt. She kissed me as if I were oxygen and she was drowning, sucking the air from my lungs, claiming every inch of me. I gasped against her mouth, the sound getting lost in the kiss, and my hands, not knowing where to land, found their way to her hair. I buried my fingers in the perfect blonde strands, messing up the immaculate order, pulling her closer, if that was even possible. Feeling the silk of her blouse slide against my thermal shirt created a delicious friction, a barrier too thin to contain the heat radiating from both of us. Victoria let out a guttural sound, low, vibrating in her throat, and the sound sent an electric shock straight to my belly. She wasn't just kissing me. She was coming undone in my arms. The Ice Queen was melting, and the fire she hid was intense enough to consume us both. Her hand on my face moved down to the back of my neck, fingers interlacing in my hair, pulling my head back to deepen the angle, to get more access. There was no technique in that kiss, just pure, raw instinct. It was the release of all the tension accumulated in months of work, all the unspoken words, all the times she was hard on me to hide, perhaps. I felt her tongue brush mine, a warm and wet invasion that made me arch my back against her, seeking more contact, more skin, more everything. The cold of the room had completely disappeared from my mind. I was burning from the inside out. She moved, trying to get on top of me, but the tight space and heavy blankets trapped us in a tangle of legs and panting breaths. I felt the weight of her leg over my waist, the thin fabric of her dress pants rubbing against the rough denim of my hips. The friction was maddening. Every point where our bodies touched felt like an ignition point, invisible sparks flying in the darkness of room 4. She stopped the kiss for a second, just to breathe, her forehead resting against mine. Her eyes were closed, long lashes trembling against pale cheeks. "I shouldn't," she began to say, voice failing, trying to invoke the reason that always governed her life. "Then don't stop," I replied, surprising myself with the boldness, brushing my lips against her tense jaw. Victoria shivered at my response, a chill that ran through her whole body. She opened her eyes, and in the darkness, I saw the decision being made. The boss mask fell to the floor of the room along with the wet coat. There, in that bed, she wasn't the CEO. She was just Victoria, a woman hungry for touch, for warmth, for someone to truly see her. And I was more than willing to be that person. She attacked my mouth again, with more ferocity this time, biting my lower lip with a possessiveness that made me groan aloud. Her hands went down my back, groping under my sweater, seeking the warm skin of my waist. The touch of her fingers on my bare skin was like fire on ice, a contrast that made me lose the last thread of control. The storm outside could destroy the world. Inside, we were creating our own disaster, and I was ready to let it destroy me. Room number 4 ceased to be a physical place, with peeling walls and the smell of mold, to become a universe contained only in the space between our bodies. There was no awkward conversation about what to do next, no clumsy negotiations about boundaries. The language we spoke there was purely tactile, written on goosebumped skin and punctuated by sighs that died before being completed. Victoria, the woman who lived protected by layers of expensive silk and professional coldness, stripped herself of all that, with an urgency bordering on desperation, seeking my skin as if I were the only real thing in a world that was collapsing outside. When the last barriers of fabric were pushed away, thrown unceremoniously onto the cold floor beside the bed, the skin-to-skin contact was overwhelming. The initial shock of temperature gave way to a fusion of heat that made me lose track of where I ended, and she began. Victoria wasn't cold beneath that facade. She was liquid fire. Her skin burned against mine, soft and feverish, and every inch that touched sent waves of electricity that made my fingers tingle and my breath catch in my throat. In that bluish darkness, guided only by touch and sound, I discovered a Victoria no one in the office would ever imagine existed. The woman who commanded empires with a stern look moaned softly when my fingers traced the line of her spine, arching her back against my touch in absolute surrender. She didn't try to lead. For the first time, she allowed herself to be guided, letting me dictate the rhythm, letting me explore the curves of her body with a reverence that seemed sacred. It was an intoxicating power reversal, holding the most powerful woman I knew, and feeling her tremble, not from cold, but from pure sensation. The sound of the wind howling outside seemed distant, muffled by the symphony of our mixed breaths and the rustling of sheets. Victoria kissed my neck, my shoulder, my collarbone, with hungry devotion, as if she wanted to mark every piece of me, as if she wanted to absorb my essence to fill the void she carried. I felt her lips, hot and wet, mapping my skin. And every touch was a silent promise, a confession of desire she would never dare verbalize under the company's fluorescent lights. There was a moment, suspended in time, when our gazes met in the gloom. Her eyes, dark and dilated, shone with raw vulnerability that squeezed my heart. There were no masks. There was no CEO. There was no assistant. There was just Victoria and Maya, two women stripped of pretenses, seeking comfort and pleasure in the abyss of a storm. She brought her hand to my face, her thumb caressing my cheek with a tenderness that made me close my eyes and surrender completely to that wave of feelings growing inside me, threatening to overflow. The intimacy between us grew, becoming a tide that dragged us far from reality. It wasn't just physical, it was a connection of lonely souls colliding. I felt her need in every hand squeeze, in every sigh that escaped her lips against my skin. It was as if we were trying to make up for years of loneliness in a single night, consuming each other with an intensity that was both terrifying and liberating. The room spun. The cold was a distant memory, and all that existed was her heat, her scent, her taste. When the peak of that connection arrived, it wasn't a loud explosion, but a deep shudder that ran through our intertwined bodies, a shared sigh that seemed to come from the bottom of the soul. Victoria buried her face in my neck, holding me tightly, as if I were the only anchor in a rough sea. I hugged her back, feeling the erratic beating of her heart against my chest, a frantic percussion that gradually calmed down, entering a softer, rhythmic pace. Silence returned to reign in the room, but now it was a comfortable silence, filled with a peace I didn't know was possible. We lay there, in a tangle of limbs and sheets, breathing returning to normal, sweating skin slowly cooling in the cold air of the room. I pulled the blanket to cover our bare shoulders, creating a warm, safe cocoon against the outside world. Victoria didn't pull away. On the contrary, she nestled even further into me, her head resting on my chest, her heavy arm thrown over my waist in a possessive and protective gesture. I stroked her hair, soft blonde strands sliding between my fingers, and felt a wave of affection so strong my eyes watered. There, vulnerable and falling asleep in my arms, she seemed younger, lighter, free from the weight of expectations she carried every day. I kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of vanilla and sweat, and realized something fundamental had changed. The invisible barrier separating us had been pulverized, and I knew, with frightening certainty, that there would be no way to rebuild it. Victoria sighed in her sleep, a soft sound of contentment, and her hand relaxed on my stomach. I stayed awake for a while longer, watching her sleep, feeling like the guardian of that fragile, precious moment. Room number 4, with all its flaws, had become our sanctuary, a place out of time and space where we could just be ourselves. I wanted to freeze that moment, live in that bubble of intimacy forever, far from judgmental stares and corporate rules. But as I watched the bluish light from the window begin to subtly change tone, announcing that the night was coming to an end, reality began to seep through the cracks of my mind. The storm wouldn't last forever. The sun would rise, the road would be cleared, and the world outside would demand we return to our roles. I looked at Victoria's serene face and felt a new kind of cold settle in my stomach. The fear of what would happen when she woke up, and the magic of the night dissipated with the daylight. I closed my eyes, trying to push those thoughts away and enjoy the last moments of peace. The heat of her body against mine was the only truth that mattered now. I fell asleep to the sound of her breathing in my ear, lulled by the illusion that maybe, just maybe, this could be more than a night of survival. But I knew, deep down, that the dawn would bring the raw light of truth, and I didn't know if we were ready to face it. The light that invaded the room the next morning had nothing poetic or soft about it. It was a ruthless, raw gray that cut through the cheap curtains, exposing every stain on the carpet and every crack in the walls. I woke up not with a kiss or a gentle touch, but with the sudden cold of absence. The side of the bed where Victoria had slept was empty, the sheets tossed as if they had been the stage of a struggle, cooling rapidly. That human warmth that had been my world hours before had disappeared, leaving behind only her scent impregnated in the pillow, a phantom reminder of what we had shared. I sat up in bed, blinking against the brightness, and found her on the other side of the tiny room. Victoria was already dressed. She had put back on the silk blouse, now wrinkled and sad, and the tailored trousers. She was standing in front of the spotted vanity mirror, trying desperately to fix her hair with her fingers, in a frantic attempt to rebuild the armor that had come undone during the night. Her posture was rigid, shoulders tense as violin strings about to snap, and she avoided looking at the reflection of the bed in the mirror. "Victoria," I called, my voice coming out hoarse from sleep and apprehension. She froze. For a second, I saw her shoulders rise in a spasm of tension. When she finally turned to face me, I didn't see the vulnerable woman who had nestled into me. I saw a scared stranger. Her face was pale, without a drop of makeup to hide the dark circles, and her blue eyes were wide, full of a panic bordering on terror. It wasn't anger, I realized with a tightness in my chest. It was pure fear. She looked like someone who had woken up at a crime scene and realized the weapon was in her hand. This could not have happened, she stammered, starting to pace in the narrow space between the bed and the door, her heels making a nervous sound on the carpet. "We crossed a line, Maya. All the lines. The code of ethics, the hierarchy. My God, I am your boss. This is a disaster." I pulled the sheet up to cover my body, feeling suddenly exposed and small in the face of her collapse. The intimacy of the previous night seemed to be getting rewritten in real time, transformed from salvation into grave administrative error. I wanted to scream, tell her that what we felt wasn't a protocol error, but the expression on her face silenced me. She was trying to rationalize the irrational, trying to put chaotic emotions inside organized folders, and she was failing. "Victoria, calm down. We were freezing. It was..." I tried to offer a way out, an excuse to ease her guilt, although it hurt me to say it. It was survival. "It was not just survival," she snapped, stopping abruptly and looking me in the eye. The honesty in her voice was brutal. "If it were just warmth, we would have just slept. But we did not. I did not." She couldn't finish the sentence. She brought her hands to her face, covering her mouth, as if to physically stop more truths from escaping. "I took advantage of the situation. I put you in an impossible position. As soon as we leave here, as soon as that door opens, everything will be different. And I do not know how to fix this." She was spiraling into catastrophizing, ready to fire herself or me to restore order to the universe. I was about to get up, go to her and try to calm her down, when a loud, urgent knock on the room door made us jump. The sound echoed like thunder in that tense space. Victoria recoiled, leaning against the wall, looking like a child caught doing mischief. "Ms. Sterling? Maya?" It was Carlos's voice. the driver, muffled by the swollen wood of the door. He sounded alarmed. I wrapped myself in the blanket and ran to the door, opening it just a crack, enough to see Carlos's worried face. The wind outside hadn't lessened. In fact, it seemed to have changed tone, becoming a deeper, constant howl. Behind him, the external hallway was practically blocked by a wall of snow reaching waist height. "What is it, Carlos? Is the tow truck here?" I asked, feeling the icy air lick my face again. Carlos shook his head, expression grim. "No tow truck. Nothing." The receptionist's radio picked up an emergency broadcast. The storm got worse overnight. They are calling it the blizzard of the century. All state roads are closed. The police issued a total shelter-in-place order. No one enters, and no one leaves in a 50-mile radius. I closed the door slowly, feeling the weight of the news fall on me like an anvil. The reality outside had just decided our fate. I turned to Victoria, who was standing in the middle of the room hearing everything. The color had completely drained from her face. The escape she was planning, the safe return to the office where she could hide behind her desk and pretend I didn't exist, had just been canceled. "We are trapped," she whispered, voice weak. "Trapped here? For how long?" Carlos said the roads are closed. "It could take days for the snowplows to get here," I replied, leaning against the closed door. "We are not going anywhere, Victoria." She looked around the dirty room, at the unmade bed that still smelled of us, at the scattered clothes, and then at me. The panic in her eyes began to shift, turning into stunned resignation. There was nowhere to run. There were no meetings, no board of directors, no social rules to save her now. The universe had locked us in that box and thrown away the key. She uncrossed the arms that were defensively folded over her chest and sat on the edge of the bed, as if her legs had lost strength. She looked at her own hands, then lifted her gaze to me again. This time, the fear was mixed with something else, a silent acceptance that the fight was over. "Days," she repeated, the word hanging in the cold air. I walked over to her, ignoring the voice in my head telling me to keep my distance, and sat beside her, but without touching her. We looked together at the window, where the snow continued to pile up, burying the world we knew, and leaving us alone with the consequence of what we had done. The storm outside was dangerous, yes, but the real storm was happening right there, in the silence between the two of us. And now, we had no choice but to face it. If someone had told me a week earlier that I would spend the 3 most peaceful days of my life locked in a moldy motel room, eating vending machine snacks and without showering properly, I would have laughed. But time inside room number 4 operated on a different frequency than the rest of the world. Outside, the blizzard of the century continued to bury the state of Illinois under feet of white, paralyzing highways and cities. But inside, isolated from everything, we had created a private universe, a fragile and precious ecosystem where the rules of the real world simply ceased to exist. Victoria's transformation was the most fascinating thing I have ever witnessed. The corporate armor wasn't just stripped away, it was forgotten in a corner of the room along with the high heels. Without meetings to lead, without shareholders to impress, and without internet to check the stock market, the ruthless CEO disappeared. In her place, a woman emerged who wore my extra flannel t-shirt because the silk blouse didn't keep her warm, who tied her blonde hair in a loose, messy bun, and who laughed, a hoarse, genuine laugh, when the vending machine swallowed our last dollar bill. Our routine became an improvised domestic dance. We woke up wrapped in each other, without the panic of the first morning, just with a lazy acceptance that this was the only way to maintain heat. We shared candy bars and packets of cheese crackers as if they were gourmet banquets, sitting cross-legged on the bed, knees touching. I saw the woman who dined in Michelin-starred restaurants lick cracker crumbs off her fingers and smile at me with a lightness that made my chest ache with affection. There was an afternoon, I think it was on the second day, when I found her sitting near the window, making the most of the meager gray light coming in. She was hunched over the bedside table, concentrating on something, the tip of her tongue slightly appearing between her lips. I approached slowly, curious, and saw she was drawing on the back of some old pizza flyers we found in the drawer. She was using a cheap ballpoint pen I had in my purse, but what she created with it was extraordinary. They were sketches of the landscape outside, the twisted trees under the weight of the snow, the structure of the neighboring roof. The strokes were fast, nervous, but charged with a sensitivity and technique that left me speechless. When she noticed my presence, she tried to cover the drawings with her hand, in a defensive reflex, cheeks flushing violently. "It is silly," she murmured, looking away. "It is just to pass the time. I used to draw in college, before my father decided art was not profitable and put me in business school." I gently moved her hand away from the paper, revealing the drawing again. It was beautiful, sad, lonely, but beautiful. "You have incredible talent, Victoria," I said, and I meant it. "Why do you hide this?" She shrugged, looking suddenly very young and insecure. "Because it is not efficient. It does not generate value for the company. It is useless." That sentence broke my heart, showing how much she had been programmed to believe her value as a human being was tied only to her financial productivity. That night, the intimacy between us deepened in a way that wasn't physical, but emotional. I sat behind her on the bed and started combing her hair with my fingers, untangling the knots that formed. She relaxed against my chest, letting out a long sigh, closing her eyes. We talked about things we would never have the courage to speak about in the office. I talked about my grandmother, about the constant fear of losing her to oblivion, about how I worked so hard not out of ambition, but out of necessity to pay for her care. Victoria listened to everything in silence, and when I finished, she turned her face and kissed the palm of my hand. "You carry the world on your back, Maya," she whispered. "I always thought you were disorganized or distracted. I did not know. I'm sorry for being so hard." Hearing an apology from her, there, in the dark, was worth more than any year-end bonus. It was the recognition of my humanity, something I had craved for years. Sleeping together ceased to be a survival necessity and became the best part of my day. There was no longer the side of the bed barrier. We slept spooning, her body fitting perfectly into mine, my arm around her waist, hands interlaced over her heart. I got used to the rhythm of her breathing, her scent, the feeling of having someone to hold. In those hours of darkness, I allowed myself to imagine that this could be our life. No suits, no reports, just us and this silent connection. But the nest we built, however cozy, was temporary. On the third day, I woke up with a strange sensation, a shift in air pressure. The room seemed a little brighter than usual. Victoria was still sleeping deeply beside me, face serene, a lock of hair falling over her eyes. I disentangled myself from her carefully so as not to wake her and walked to the window, pulling back the grimy curtain. My heart stopped for a second and then sank into my stomach. The sky was no longer that oppressive lead gray. There were tiers of pale blue between the clouds. The snow had stopped falling, and in the distance, I heard a sound I hadn't heard in days, a mechanical, low, constant sound, growing in volume. It was the sound of a diesel engine, the sound of a snowplow clearing the way on the main road, the sound of civilization coming back to get us. I should have felt relief. After all, we were saved. But all I felt was a cold, selfish panic. The world was coming back, and with it, the rules, expectations, and distance. I looked at Victoria sleeping in the bed, so vulnerable and mine, and knew our time in that private paradise had just run out. The bubble was about to burst, and I was terrified of what would remain of us when reality invaded that room. I went back to bed with a heavy heart, the mechanical sound of the snowplow outside growing like a countdown to the end of our private world. I sat on the edge of the mattress, watching Victoria sleep for a few more precious seconds, trying to memorize the softness of her expression before the corporate armor hardened her features again. When I touched her shoulder lightly to wake her, she stirred and opened her eyes slowly, a sleepy, intimate smile appearing on her lips, a smile that was just for me. But as soon as she saw my grave expression and heard the noise outside, the smile died. She sat up abruptly, the sheet falling to her waist, and looked at the window with a mix of understanding and dread. "They are here," I said, voice coming out sadder than I intended. "The roads are being cleared. Cell signal should be back any moment." Victoria said nothing. She didn't celebrate the rescue, didn't run to pack things, didn't sigh with relief. Instead, she curled her legs against her chest and rested her chin on her knees, looking suddenly very small in that gray room. The silence that settled between us was no longer the comfortable silence of the last few days. It was a silence charged with fear, the fear that everything we had built in there would unravel as soon as we crossed the door into the icy air of reality. We began to pack our few things in a slow, melancholy rhythm. We folded the blankets, collected empty wrappers, put our shoes back on. Every gesture felt like a goodbye. When Victoria picked up her designer bag, she paused and looked at the object, as if she didn't recognize it anymore, as if that life of luxury and haste no longer made sense for the woman she had become in those 72 hours. She dropped the bag on the bed and turned to me, blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "Maya, wait," she asked, voice trembling. She crossed the small space separating us and held my hands, her fingers squeezing mine tight, as if wanting to anchor herself to me. "Before we leave, before we turn on the phones and the world falls on us again, I need to tell you something. I need you to know the truth." I stopped, my heart racing. I looked at her, expecting her to set rules, ask for discretion, or say it was all a wonderful mistake. But what I saw in her eyes was a raw vulnerability that took my breath away. "I spent my whole life following a script," she began, speaking fast, stumbling over words. "The right school, the right job, the right posture. I was trained not to feel, not to falter. I always admired your strength, Maya. I saw you taking care of your grandmother, enduring my absurd demands without breaking, and I felt envy. I felt envy because you were real, and I was just a projection of what my father wanted." She paused, taking a deep breath, seeking courage for the next part. She lifted a hand and touched my face, thumb caressing my cheek with a reverence that made me close my eyes. "I never imagined this could happen to me," she confessed, voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "I never imagined I would fall in love with a woman. I did not even know I was capable of feeling this connection that goes beyond the physical, that touches the soul. I always thought love was a transaction, a strategic partnership. But with you, In these days, in this dirty room, I felt more alive and more loved than in 40 years of a perfect life. Her confession hung in the air, powerful and transformative. Victoria Sterling, the woman I thought was made of ice, was there, admitting I had melted not just her facade, but rewritten her very identity. I felt tears running down my face, hot and free. I squeezed her hands, pulling her closer until our foreheads touched. "Me too, Vic," I whispered, using the nickname born in the intimacy of those days. "I feel alive with you too." "I am scared," she admitted, closing her eyes. "I am scared of going back there and losing this. That the company, Brad, the expectations, that all of it suffocates what we have. I do not want to go back to being that cold woman, Maya. I do not want to lose you." "You are not going to lose me," I promised, with fierce certainty. "We are not the same people who walked in here. The storm changed everything." Victoria opened her eyes and stared at me with burning intensity. "Can we try?" she asked, the bravest question she had ever asked. "Out there? In the real world? I know it will be hard. I know we will have to hide at first because of the board, but I want this. I want us. I want to draw more. I want to help you with your grandmother. I want to sleep with you in a decent bed. Will you agree to try with me?" That wasn't just a request to date. It was a request for mutual salvation. She was offering me a place in her life, not as a subordinate, but as a partner. And I, who had already given my heart to her the first night I warmed her, had no other possible answer. "Yes," I replied, smiling through tears. "I agree to try. I agree to everything." Victoria let out a sob of relief, a broken, happy sound, and kissed me. It wasn't an urgent, hungry kiss like the first, nor purely physical like those of our second night. It was a slow, deep kiss, tasting of promise and commitment. It was a seal placed on our agreement, a way of saying I am with you, without using words. There, in that cheap motel room, while the world outside tried to invade our sanctuary, we made a silent pact that we would face any storm together. When we separated, panting and eyes shining, the sound of the snowplow was loud, almost at the motel door. Victoria took a deep breath, straightened her posture, not with the stiffness of before, but with a new strength, more natural, and grabbed her bag. She extended her hand to me, not to give me orders, but to walk by my side. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," I replied, interlacing my fingers with hers. We walked together to the door. When Victoria turned the knob and the blinding white light of day invaded the room, dissipating the last shadows of our refuge, I squeezed her hand tight. We knew the real test began now. The magic of isolation was over, and we would have to fight to keep that flame lit in the icy wind of Chicago. But as we took the first step outside, I looked at her profile and knew that, no matter what happened in the office, we had already won. The ride back to Chicago was a silent blur of white landscapes gradually transforming into urban gray. The tow truck that rescued us dropped us at a gas station where a company car was already waiting for us, a black sedan identical to the one that had broken down, as if the corporation were trying to erase the incident from memory. As soon as the driver started the car and we entered the highway flow, I felt Victoria shift beside me. The relaxed posture disappeared, her spine straightened, and she picked up her phone, which was now vibrating incessantly with hundreds of overdue emails. She didn't let go of my hand immediately, but the grip loosened, not from lack of affection, but from the need to put on boxing gloves to face the world waiting for us. When the Chicago skyline appeared, with its glass and steel skyscrapers cutting the icy sky, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. That mirrored building where we worked wasn't just an office. It was the stage where Victoria played her role as Ice Queen, and where I was just the invisible assistant. The fear that the magic of Room 4 would dissolve as soon as we passed through the revolving doors was paralyzing. Victoria must have felt my tension, because she looked away from her phone screen for a second and shot me a quick glance, undetectable to the driver, but one that screamed, "Trust me." The car stopped in front of the Sterling marketing building. There were photographers and onlookers at the entrance, attracted by the news that the CEO was missing in the storm. Victoria took a deep breath, composed the iron mask on her face, and opened the door. The flash of cameras popped against us like artificial lightning. I lowered my head, instinctively trying to hide in her shadow, returning to my place as subordinate. We walked through the marble lobby, the sound of her heels echoing with that familiar authority while employees stopped to stare and whisper. I could hear the whispers. "They are back. Look at her hair." The assistant was with her. We entered the private elevator, and as soon as the metal doors closed, isolating us from the gazes, Victoria released the breath she was holding. She didn't touch me. There were security cameras there, but she positioned herself so her shoulder brushed against mine, minimal and forbidden contact that served to calm me. The digital panel counted the floors going up, each number bringing us closer to the lion's den. The 40th floor, the executive floor, where the sharks swam. The doors opened to the executive floor, which was in controlled chaos. Phones rang, assistants ran. And standing right in the center of the reception, blocking our path like a doorman to hell, was Brad, the senior accounts director, a man who wore expensive suits to hide a cheap soul, and who had been trying to pull the rug out from under Victoria for years. He held a cup of coffee with a smug smile, that smile of someone who thought they won the game by default. "Well, well, Sleeping Beauty has awakened," said Brad, voice loud enough for the whole office to stop and look. "We were worried, Victoria. We started to think you had run off to Aspen to ski while we dealt with the industrial client crisis here. The board was not happy at all with your strategic disappearance." Victoria stopped in front of him, motionless. I stopped a step behind her, feeling my blood run cold. Normally, Victoria would ignore Brad or give a dry, technical response. But Brad wasn't finished. He shifted his gaze to me, sweeping me up and down with contempt that made me want to disappear into the carpet. "And I see you brought your shadow," he continued, laughing through his nose. "I hope she was useful for carrying luggage at least. Because honestly, Victoria, taking such an inexperienced junior assistant to a crucial meeting was the first mistake. If the contract was lost, I imagine the blame lies with the incompetence of the support staff, as always." I locked my jaw, expecting the usual humiliation, expecting Victoria to agree or stay silent to keep up appearances. It was the usual script. Blame goes down, bonuses go up. I was already preparing my mental apology, ready to lower my head and accept the blow to protect her image. But then, Victoria laughed. It wasn't the polite office laugh. It was a cold, sharp, dangerous laugh. She took a step toward Brad, invading his personal space with aggression that made his smile falter. "Careful, Brad. Envy causes wrinkles," she said, voice calm but projected so every soul on that floor heard. "For your information, the contract was not lost. I closed the deal over the phone as soon as the signal came back on the road, using drafts Maya prepared." The silence in the office was absolute. Brad blinked, confused. Victoria didn't stop. She turned slightly, extending a hand not to push me away, but to bring me to her side, on the same visual level. And regarding inexperience, continued Victoria, tone hardening like steel, Maya not only saved the presentation, she demonstrated resilience and crisis management capability in that storm that I have not seen in any director of this company in the last 5 years, including you. While you were here drinking coffee and gossiping about my life, she was ensuring the CEO of this company returned alive to save your quarterly bonus. I looked at Victoria, shocked. She wasn't just defending me, she was exalting me. She was rewriting my reputation in front of the entire company, putting her own corporate weight to shield me. Brad opened his mouth to retort, but Victoria raised a hand, ending the conversation. If you have any further comments about my team, Brad, I suggest you send them in writing to HR. I am sure they will love to analyze your tone. Now get out of my face. I have work to do. And so does Maya. She walked past him as if he were smoke, and I followed her, head held high for the first time in years. I felt looks of admiration and shock from other employees as we walked to her glass office at the end of the hall. Brad stayed behind, red and mute, defeated at his own game. We entered the president's office and Victoria closed the door, turning the blinds to ensure privacy. As soon as the world outside was blocked out, her warrior posture softened. She turned to me, and the shine in her eyes was pure pride and complicity. "Are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern replacing fury. I never saw anyone talk to him like that," I stammered, still feeling the adrenaline. "Thank you. You did not have to do that." "I did," she corrected, stepping closer and adjusting the collar of my coat, an intimate gesture disguised as a professional adjustment. "I said things would be different, Maya. I did not lie. No one touches you. No one disrespects you. Not while I am here." I smiled, feeling a wave of heat that had nothing to do with the building's heater. The storm had passed. The office was cold and impersonal, but the woman in front of me was still my Victoria. She walked to her desk, picked up her planner, and looked at me with a mischievous glint that promised trouble, of the best kind. "Now, Miss Maya," she said, returning to professional tone but with subtext only the two of us understood. "We have a lot of work to make up. And then, we have a dinner to plan. I believe I owe you a meal that does not come from a vending machine. What do you say?" The 2 months that followed were a dizzying exercise in living 2 simultaneous lives. To the corporate world of Chicago, nothing had changed. Victoria Sterling remained the unshakable CEO who walked the corridors as if she owned the very air we breathed, and I remained the competent assistant who organized her schedule. But to us, the glass and steel office had turned into the setting of a secret, delicious game, full of invisible codes only we knew how to decipher. The adrenaline of keeping our relationship hidden under fluorescent lights was almost as addictive as the moments when we were finally alone. Our public routine was perfectly rehearsed theater, but the cracks were where the magic happened. It started with small gestures, subtle power reversals that made my heart race. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I arrived at my desk to find a steaming thermal cup of oat milk latte with honey, exactly how I liked it, and which I had never told her. There was no note, just a discreet lipstick mark on the rim of the lid, and a quick glance from Victoria through the glass wall of her office. An almost imperceptible eyebrow raise that said, "I take care of you now." Board meetings, previously torturous, turned into our private battlefield of silent flirting. While Brad or some other executive droned on about fiscal projections, I caught Victoria's eye across the mahogany table. She kept a serious expression, but her eyes shone with amused complicity, sometimes biting her lower lip lightly to contain a smile when I discreetly rolled my eyes at a stupid idea. That telepathic connection, The feeling of us against them transformed the hostile environment into something that felt like ours. But it was the elevators that held our most dangerous secrets. Those 30 seconds between the ground floor and the penthouse were our oasis of stolen time. As soon as the metal doors closed and isolated us from cameras and curious eyes, gravity shifted. We didn't need to speak. Her hand sought mine instantly, our fingers interlacing with desperate urgency, thumbs caressing the soft skin of the palm. The hum of the rising elevator masked the sound of our accelerated breaths, and the smell of her perfume invaded the cubicle, reminding me of the nights when that scent was the only thing covering me. There was a night when work pressure was unbearable, deadlines blowing up, and phones ringing nonstop. Victoria walked past my desk, touched my shoulder lightly, a touch that lasted a second longer than socially acceptable, and whispered, "Roof, 5 minutes." I went up the emergency stairs, heart in my mouth, and found her up there, looking at the infinite lights of Chicago against the night sky. The wind was icy, vaguely reminding me of our blizzard, but now it didn't scare me anymore. She said nothing when I approached, just opened the Italian wool blazer she was wearing and wrapped me in it, pulling me into a hug that blocked out the cold and city noise. We stood there, on top of the world, her kissing the top of my head while I listened to the calm rhythm of her heart. I was suffocating down there, she confessed against my hair. I needed to breathe you. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just the secret girlfriend. I was her refuge, the place she ran to when the CEO mask got too heavy. And the mask was slipping more and more, even outside work. Victoria kept the promise she made in that motel room. She rented a small art studio in a quiet neighborhood, a place full of natural light and the smell of oil paint, where she spent weekends dirty with colorful pigments, looking younger and freer than ever. Seeing the woman who signed million-dollar contracts with a Mont Blanc pen now holding a brush with the same passion was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I stayed there, reading or studying, just watching her find herself again, piece by piece. She also transformed my life in practical, silent ways. The salary raise she approved. Merit, Maya, not charity, she insisted sternly, allowed me to hire a private nurse for my grandmother. For the first time in years, I didn't need to run home afraid of finding her lost or hurt. My grandmother, in her lucid moments, called Victoria the pretty lady with sad eyes who smiles when she sees you. Victoria cried the first time she heard that, and I knew she had found in my broken little family the affection her money never bought. Our domestic life, hidden in her luxurious apartment, was the opposite of the office coldness. We ate Thai food on the kitchen counter, laughed at bad TV shows, and slept intertwined in that huge bed that made the motel one look like a matchbox. But ironically, sometimes I missed room number 4. There, we had nothing to hide. Here, every goodbye kiss at the door came with a paranoid check of the hallway. The tension of keeping the secret was starting to take its toll. I saw exhaustion in Victoria's eyes, the constant fear that a slip-up would destroy her reputation or my career. Brad kept circling like a vulture, waiting for any failure, and office rumors were getting louder. Why does Victoria only call Maya for meetings? Why do they leave at the same time? We knew we were walking on thin ice that could break at any moment. Then, on a Friday in February, Victoria walked into my office and closed the door. She didn't look worried. She looked electric, with that shine in her eyes I had learned to associate with impulsive, wonderful decisions. She placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on my desk, next to my keyboard. "What is this?" I asked, feeling a flutter in my stomach. "This is our exit," she said, leaning hands on my desk and leaning close, ignoring the open blinds. This is the end of secrets, Maya, at least for a week. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were 2 first-class tickets and a cruise itinerary. Destination: Caribbean. Departure date: February 14th, Valentine's Day. I looked at her, shocked. Victoria, we cannot just disappear. The board will freak out. Brad can go to hell, she interrupted, with a smile that could light up all of Chicago. I am no longer a hostage to that chair, Maya. You taught me that. We are going on this cruise. And when we come back, well, I have a plan for when we come back. But first, I need to see you wearing a summer dress and holding a cocktail, far from any snow and any spreadsheet. What do you say? Shall we run away again? If you told me 2 months ago that I would be holding a glass of chilled champagne, watching the sunset turn the Caribbean Sea into a painting of liquid gold, I would have said you were delirious. The contrast with Chicago snow was so violent, it felt like we had traveled to another planet, not just another latitude. Here, the air didn't cut skin like ice blades. It caressed us, warm and humid, charged with salt and promises. The deadly silence of room number 4 had been replaced by the gentle sound of waves breaking against the ship's hull and distant jazz music playing on the upper deck. It was Valentine's Day, and the world around us celebrated love. But I knew no one on that ship had a story like ours. I rested my elbows on the polished wood railing of the ship, feeling the breeze play with my light dress, and looked at the woman beside me. Victoria Sterling was unrecognizable, and not just because of the golden tan her skin had gained over the last few days. She had abandoned the armor of black suits and stiletto heels. Today, she wore a loose blue silk dress that left her back bare and moved with the wind as if part of the sea. Her blonde hair, always tied in a severe cut, was loose and slightly waved by humidity, falling over her shoulders in a relaxed way that made her look 10 years younger. She was laughing at something I had said, head thrown back, eyes closed against the setting sun. That light, unencumbered laugh was the sound of my personal victory. I hadn't just survived the storm with her. I had helped her find the way back to herself. The Ice Queen had melted completely, revealing the passionate, artistic woman who lived hidden inside. You are staring at me again, Maya, she teased, opening one eye and turning her face to me with a lazy smile. I am admiring the view, I replied, without looking away from her to the ocean. I still cannot believe we are here. It feels like a dream, Vic. I am afraid to wake up and be back on that frozen road, trying to fix a smoking radiator. Victoria sighed, a sound of deep contentment, and moved closer, standing behind me. She wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her chin on my shoulder, enveloping me with that warmth that was now my home. It is not a dream, she whispered in my ear. It is our new reality. And speaking of reality, I made a decision, Maya. I sent the email to the board this morning, before we left the cabin. My heart skipped a beat. I turned in her arms to face her, worried. What did you do? I asked for a reduction in hours. I appointed a new director of operations to handle the day-to-day. Not Brad, obviously. She laughed and I relaxed. I will continue as CEO, but I will focus on macro strategy. The rest of the time, I will spend in the studio. I am going to paint, Maya. For real. I want my first exhibition to be at the end of this year. My eyes filled with tears. I knew how much this cost her pride, how hard it was to let go of the reins of the empire she built. But she was choosing happiness over absolute power. She was choosing the life we drew on those pizza flyers in the motel. I am so proud of you, I said, voice choked. And you know, The nurse sent me a message today. My grandmother is great. She ate everything, and even asked when the pretty lady is visiting her again. For the first time in my life, Vic, I do not feel like I'm drowning. I feel like I can breathe. Victoria smiled, a tender smile that reached her blue eyes, now as warm as the sea below. She raised her champagne glass, crystal sparkling under the orange twilight light. So, a toast, she proposed. What are we toasting to? I asked, raising my glass. The Caribbean? The studio? The defeat of Brad? No, she said, shaking her head slowly. Let's toast to the broken car. I laughed, surprised. To the broken car? That nightmare? That was the best day of my life, Maya, she said, with sudden, passionate seriousness. If that engine had not died, if the snow had not trapped us, I would still be locked in my glass tower, alone and cold, thinking I was happy. That broken car gave me you. It broke me so you could fix me. So, yes, thank you for that damn radiator. The weight of those words settled on us, sweet and absolute. We toasted, the sound of crystal clinking clear and pure, and drank champagne that tasted of victory. Victoria set the glass aside and held my face with both hands, looking at me as if I were the only person on the deck, on the ship, in the world. Happy Valentine's Day, Maya, she whispered before kissing me. The kiss tasted of salt, champagne, and eternity. It wasn't a desperate kiss like in the snow, nor a secret kiss like in the elevator. It was a kiss of freedom. There, under the open sky, without walls to hide us, we claimed each other. I felt her love flow into me, a constant, safe tide, and knew that no matter what storms came in the future, and they would come, we would always have our own shelter. When we separated, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a trail of stars starting to dot the sky. Victoria held my hand, interlacing our fingers tightly, and we stood there, watching the infinite sea. Life is funny. Sometimes it needs to freeze you to the bone to teach you to value warmth. Sometimes it needs to trap you in a tiny room to show you the whole world can fit in a hug. I looked at the woman beside me, my boss, my lover, my partner, and smiled at the horizon. The storm had passed. And us? We were just starting to sail. And so ends the journey of Maya and Victoria, proving that even the hardest ice melts when it meets the right flame. If this story warmed your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the Forbidden Romances channel. And now I want to know from you. Would you have the courage to break your company's rules for an overwhelming love? Tell me in the comments. Until the next story.